friend or standing by the way.
Welcome to the third episode of the MEON Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the revival of Irish intellectual life. For our third episode, we are proud to present the concluding part of our interview with Peter Ryan. To listen to the first and second episodes, click on the link in the description to this video. To keep up to date with MEON podcasts and audio content, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. So, Peter, the latter half of your essay deals with the Collison brothers. Can you introduce them? Describe why you believe that they're likely to fulfill a role in Ireland analogous to that of Musk and Thiel in the American context, and the ways in which their views contrast with your own prescriptions for Ireland.
Sure. So I chose the Collisons because I think that's an Iron Man of the other side, where there's some more cartoonish figures that I could certainly maybe target, but I think their strengths make them good subjects to employ critique to. In addition, they are billionaires, so they have money. They are part of Silicon Valley. They are connected to the investment network of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. And with their company being in Silicon Valley, they have a lot of American ties that they'll need to protect. And mostly, they've engaged in political activism. They have funded a think tank, Progress Ireland. And so this makes believe they are fair game, and they are vying for influence and to change. And I think that their strong business acumen and leadership capability in that regard makes them as sort of beacons to guide, perhaps not just sort of the sort of McGregor right, but certainly be influential to the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gaelers. Like I said, there's a lot more they can do behind the scenes in shaping policy than they can in like having specific candidates get elected that are part of some sort of new tech bro party. But so with that being said, so that's why I chose them. The Collisons, obviously most people in Ireland know them. They come out of Limerick. I believe they're somewhere between their late 20s and mid 30s at this point. And they started a company called Stripe. It does financial transactions over the internet. Famously, they sort of moved to America because they didn't find the tech sector that forthcoming in Ireland, and they sort of built all of their capital out there in America. And it was only sort of after the Stripe was already sort of successful that they then had a Dublin headquarters that they put up and sort of had the dual presence of being American and sort of an Irish company. With obviously the American HQ being the primary. So that's their business history. And when it comes to sort of reviewing their ideology, there is actually a plethora of sort of interviews, podcasts, essays, articles that one can read, and even their social media handles, to discern what might be their primary motivating factor. And what I have concluded and analyzed regarding that is they very much kind of share in the libertarianness that comes out of Silicon Valley. I would say that they almost in a way they sort of have polite Irish manners or something, where I think they are like they would not enjoy the sort of crudeness of like an Elon Musk in doing it, but nonetheless they kind of at the end of the day share in a lot of that core ideology. And so where I would then place the Iron Man of defining exactly what their ideology is, it comes out of the economist Tyler Cowen, who is the premier economist out of George Mason University and its appendage think tank, the Mercatus Center. And so we can find many ways where Tyler Cowen has been like a co-writer on essays with Patrick Collison, has been specifically referenced as sort of a guide to Patrick and various places, has been sort of a business partner per se on one of his business initiatives called like Fast Grants, where they actually secured funding from Peter Thiel. But yeah, you just sort of get a sense from going through all this, is that if there is any school of thought and tutor of that school of thought that the Collisons listen to, it is Tyler Cowen and what he represents. And so Tyler Cowen is sort of a mild-mannered economist from George Mason University. It obviously sits outside the traditional big-name schools, the Ivy Leagues, the sub-Ivies. But nonetheless, it has sort of been only made prominent by the fact that essentially the Koch brothers of America, which are much older, kind of boomer era business elites that own a lot of different corporate interests, have funded it as an outlet to promote its or their version of neoliberal ideology. And actually, like much of the sort of neoliberal 90s to through 2000s, in the pre-Trump era, that neoliberalism was like a Koch product, that especially on the Republican right. A lot of it was coming out of places like George Mason University and the Mercatus Center. Tyler Cowen got his sort of undergrad at George Mason in the 80s. He was tutored by one of the Koch affiliate professors that was already there. And then Cohen went on to become, a professor at GMU very shortly after he finished his PhD work. And was basically plugged into the Mercatus Center, which is, the think tank of it, which is the core apparatus for writing about policy and interfacing with the government. But by the time 2000 rolls around, he's sort of like well enmeshed as sort of a leadership role there. So he's very much hand cultivated as sort of like a very much an out of date neoliberal machine that created him. But what's funny, and especially his fusion with the Collisons, like he has an air of novelty to him. Like he's just a smart guy coming out with fresh takes. And it's just like he's one of the biggest examples of a artificial intellectual that's funded by oligarchic interests in the United States that there is. And and the ideology that he promotes is a very maybe clever but ordinary neoliberalism that he has tried to shift into something that can be palatable to sort of the post-Trump era. He's defined that as state capacity libertarianism. Other libertarians have sort of got on board with that. And so I view the Collisons as basically having the school of thought of this sort of mutation that Cowen has done for neoliberalism to make it this sort of to make it basically the sort of Thielian version of like we want libertarianism in the sense that government intervention on oligarchic interest is reduced and obligations as sort of a noblesse oblige to the general population is reduced. But we want a carve out for like state capacity for when we want it to like fund our pet projects and give us more power. And Tyler Cowen literally references Peter Thiel as an influence in the core essay that he wrote defining state capacity libertarianism. So now I think we have the kind of biography of the Collisons and the sort of intellectual milieu that they are coming out of. And so I view this as totally anathema when they try to project their individual influence on Ireland and their implicit influence through think tanks like Progress Ireland that they fund. And so I view trying to do some sort of derivative cokeism in Ireland is just a non-starter. From one, like I said before, I mean, eventually you're going to hit a hard place, perhaps with some on the left and the center, where they just like outright reject it because someone does a few Google searches and figures all this out. And then number two, it's just not conducive to the agenda as outlined by my definition of national populism. Um, we want to reject everything kind of the Kochs represent. We want to reject the concept of libertarianism, especially with many people having conventional right-wing priors that sort of embrace that style. Again, much of national populism is, in a sense, like an embracement of the state, in that we want the state to do things that are competent and that are in the interest of the population. This immigration, as that topic goes, I mean, that is a government intervention to stop, a free market of labor, of human capital moving across borders. The government apparatus needed to conduct a policy like that to stop it is actually an increase in government buildup. So so that's where you start to get into real problems by allowing these individuals and the ideologies they promote to fester, and that the core motivations and goals start to get clouded, and you just end up, you just end up being in square one. And then in 20 years, our kids are going to say one day, how did our parents' generation get fooled into doing the same thing over again? And and if we don't talk about this stuff, we will. So yeah, so that's the Collisons. They are the millennial reimagining of the Koch brothers for Ireland, and yeah, and I'll as a footnote throw out, if someone could pull up an individual policy they might suggest, or Progress Ireland might suggest, that is sort of kind of it's a okay policy, but that's sort of not the point that I'm making. I'm making a point about epistemological pollution, rather than sort of like, is one idea somewhat cool? I do not want their overall philosophy corrupting nationalist populism, and then that overall trajectory steering the ship in the wrong direction. So that's my analysis of the Collisons.
All across the empire dead, the pulse of life cuts through the heart.
You argue in your essay that there's a disjunction between MAGA 1.0 and MAGA 2.0. If you're correct, the vacillation of Trumpism seems to point to aesthetics as the sole knot that binds both iterations, the reduction of politics to personality, and the frivolity of symbology, reminiscent in some ways of Perón's legacy in Argentina, which was almost universally embraced until Milei. Does America have a chance to reimbue populism, a phenomenon which is often critiqued on grounds of its amorphousness and purported disregard for principles, with substance and content?
Yeah, so with America, there is certainly a preservation of aesthetics of 2016, with certainly not some of the substance. We've spoken to some of that. But one of the things I would suggest, I kind of started my career by analyzing like cryptocurrencies and understanding that sector. And then so I was very much curious that Trump was able to hold the position that all cryptocurrencies were scams. He would say these things over and over again, basically up until last year. Uh, and it is incredible, the 180 pivot that he's been able to do on this topic. where we have Trump coin being launched as an explicit, valueless token, that is going up in price for no reason other than, people are buying it, and not even the sort of shred of, Rube Goldberg machine business proposals of, it'll be used for some sort of tokenomics that some of these crypto people come up with. So that is a curious way where we have kept things like the MAGA hat and the YMCA dance and the trash talking, but like here on a very substantive policy of allowing crypto scams to proliferate, and like completely deregulating the sector to support it, if not like allowing the government to actually like fund it with like a Bitcoin strategic reserve and policies like that. It just shows that those substantive policies have been changed, but oh well, we still have him calling people dumb, and isn't that what it's about? And so that's certainly a fair critique of populism, that it is this amorphous thing that doesn't have substance and that, kind of rides on personality cults and aesthetics. Although I would say that a lot of that is contingent to sort of an American case study and context. I think individual European nations have different contexts that may promote a thing like that or suppress it, and instill more of an authenticity. Like I think for whatever anyone says about Le Pen's party in France, I think there is a much deeper substantive ideological tradition to that brand of populism than you would say like whatever MAGA is in the US. And so from that standpoint, you can find writers, you can find magazines, you can find a coherent tradition that's applying that. In America, it's much more jumbled, and for other reasons, America being a unipolar, world power, that it precludes it from having certain ideological currents that are coherent within it. That populism would kind of go against that existing bipartisan consensus. But in the case of Ireland, again, I think, could you make a criticism of populism that it's very reactionary and it's very sort of vulgar and blah, blah, blah? Sure. I mean, you could make that criticism of the stupidity of Simon Harris, not understanding, that COVID-19 is in reference to the year, not because there was like multiple, he thought it was like because there was like multiple COVIDs. So like, there's plenty of ways you can call left, right, center stupid here and there. But what I would say is what I spoke about earlier, the continuum of history of Irish nationalist thought, the specific thinkers and writers, the specific essays, books, brochures, newspapers that you are able to surface and find a connection, even going beyond 1922 and finding men like Ray Crotty or Desmond Fennell that kind of supply a more modern analysis and articulation of things. I think as long as you're able to have this continuum and have then people writing today, and I'm sure when people review your great publication, MEON, they can find modern writers today that are actually doing the Lord's work in sort of referencing the tradition while reconceptualizing it for our present time and infusing it with their own novel innovations. I think that is a way you fight against just something being purely aesthetic and the substance being hollowed out. Because I think, I think the importance of history, of awareness of history, is the clearest immune response.
So for my final question, do you believe that America will do well under Trump's presidency over the next 4 years?
It is very hard to say what a given specific event that may or may not occur. I put some predictions down in various places in sort of various subsections of U.S. culture and the economy. My general prediction is that the macro trends is that America has shifted from a unipolar power into a world environment that is multipolar, with the policy choices that America's made. One, to preserve that unipolarity in the past, and two, to sort of follow the logics of oligarchic ideologies, has decimated its ability to project power and to sustain that power, as well as just sort of keep their domestic citizenry engaged and supportive of the government's mission and an overall sort of zeitgeist. And so with that being said, you have an environment where other powers are rising, the relative power of the United States is weakening, the absolute sort of power and productive capability of America is diminishing. And so these things aren't changing. And so you have to contend with that. And what seems to be the case is that America will not update the software so much on that it is changing its strategic interest from the unipolar era, but it is changing some of the methods of how it operates and moving to sort of from the old, liberal world order to a post-liberal order, where it is just sort of moving the hard power from implicit to explicit, moving the sort of belittling its allies from implicit to explicit. But largely the end strategic goals remain the same. So you can expect continued attempts at vassalage of its allies in Europe. And however, I think that probably is one of the quicker things to go in America's overall decline. But America will find those kinetic wars that it always loves and try to devote resources to them. So obviously the Middle East theater, we'll see if Ukraine is ultimately resolved. It might appear that way, but I think it's too early to tell if Trump actually commits to resolving that. Trump armed Ukraine with many weapons in his first term, even though the war did not start under it. So that's yet to be seen if America stays there. There's obviously Taiwan if America gets into that. The China hawks in America are very obviously concerned with that. America is getting very boisterous about Latin America, and it seems like there's going to be now a Latin American theater. So you have America overstretching itself on multiple front wars and its foreign policy dimension. And those sort of acute wars will, I think, require resources to be removed from the sort of the lesser kinetic areas. So that's where I said, I think Europe, because it's not so much kinetic, depending on how you see Ukraine, I think Trump announced either today or yesterday that he wants to pull 20,000 troops out of Germany or Europe at large. So this is kind of evidence that America is clawing back resources from places it doesn't really need it to places it will need it in the future. So that's sort of the future of foreign policy. But you'll probably still see the hostile trash talk and certainly the sort of economic tariff approach to Europe at large. From more of an internal economic angle, I think a lot of the manufacturing industrial policy has totally been kind of lost. What we have now are financial parasitism that is probably going to continue at a scale and freedom that we have really not seen. And if there's any shred of the sort of industrial policy populism that is left over, and notably, the key influencer on that was Trump's trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, who was frozen out, according to the Wall Street Journal, from the Trump admin this go around. So with that being the case, that's gone. But to the degree that there's a shred of industrial policy thinking left, it will probably just go into bolstering the military-industrial complex and making sure that for those few kinetic acute wars that America wants to fight in the future, that it has the war supplies to make that happen. And you're even seeing a marriage of that with the Silicon Valley people, where from surveillance to intelligence to outright manufacture of drones and bombs. Yeah, these people are sort of feeding into that, and so that's the only. So it went from being something about rejuvenating the kind of consumer economy of America and supplying families with good jobs to support them and increase the fertility rate and all these arguments that were made. And now it's just we want to support the military-industrial complex. That's what industrial policy in America means. So yeah, so you'll probably get kind of a mixture of like a sugar rush bubble economy combined with a sharp correction that happens within the next 1 to 2 years. It's hard to say with when bubbles pop. You can never truly predict the time and place that they will. But what we know is that there's definitely going to be a bubble. There's definitely going to be a pop of the bubble at some point. I think that there at least has to be a minor correction in the next 1 to 2 years. But when the big correction will come, I've pegged it like the big correction could happen within 5 years to 20 years. And this could be kind of the last true power projection that America has. And that's why it's sort of going for the bubble. And then after that 20-year period, we might live in a world where America is truly a diminished power existing in a multipolar environment. And it exists as mostly a fossil fuel and agricultural exporter, with maybe a few capital, market cities like New York City stuck onto it, and remnants of a military-industrial complex. What you basically will probably see is like a combination of 1990s Russia and generic Latin American country with that primarily exports commodities and has authoritarian regimes. So that's my rosy picture for the United States future. Yeah, I find it hard to believe that the prevailing power of the world for the past nearly 70 years, becomes a second-rate power by the necessity of history, in sort of a positive way. Now, if I were to say there's authentic populists in America, I would hope that their remedies would be able to mitigate that in a positive way. But with the trajectories we've seen, I don't see really how that is probable, and we're probably just going to um, ride the last fumes of America out rather than try to truly fix America. Uh, the elites are driving a rented car. They're not thinking about owning the car in a way. I think this counterintuitively provides Europe with a window of opportunity to break free of some of the constraints that America has put on it, to disconnect from the ideological channels that America produces, return to a lot of its authentic ideologies and interests, and with the unipolar power being weakened, it can actually like have a renaissance. And so I'm bullish on Europe. I think there's a lot more opportunity to Europe, and unfortunately, the place that has given me my accent might not have the same future.